On the 22nd of May 2010, shocking footage was sent around the world of the smoking wreckage of a passenger aircraft halfway down a hillside next to Mangalore International Airport in India. It was immediately clear that the number of casualties would be high. But questions soon started to arise as to how this situation came to be. The weather in Mangalore was relatively clear, so what had happened to cause Air India Express's first and most deadly crash? It can often be said that silence is golden, but the silence that was recorded on the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder would speak louder than words to explain what's happened on this sad day. On the 22nd of May 2010, Air India Express Flight 812 was operating its usual route from Mangalore to Dubai, with a quick turnaround in Dubai and straight back to Mangalore. Each leg of the flight was approximately 4 hours, and on the sector in question, the aircraft was completing the inbound flight back to Mangalore from Dubai. The quick turnaround of the aircraft was completed within 1 hour and 22 minutes, with the crew ready to board the passengers. The aircraft being used on the route was a Boeing 737-800 SFP that was less than 3 years old. The SFP in the aircraft type denotes that the aircraft was designed for short field performance, or in other words, designed to be used at airports with short runways. This particular series of Boeing 737-800s was used on this route as the runway at Mangalore is notified as being just over 8,000 feet, or 2,450 meters long by 45 meters wide. Additionally, Mangalore is one of 7 Indian airports designated by the country's Directorate General of Civil Aviation to be a critical airfield, which is due to it having a tabletop runway. Tabletop runways are called this because they are located on top of a plateau or a hill, with either one or both ends of the runway having a steep drop-off. Their unique position can give the pilots the optical illusion of the runway being the same level as the planes below, and if the Instrument Landing System, or ILS, is not available at these airfields, the visual approach is extremely precise to account for this possible optical illusion. Rules at Air India Express had made a special qualification requirement that only the captain could be the pilot in command for approaches to these airfields owing to how difficult they can be. This is an important point to remember for this incident, and it will aid you in understanding the actions of the crew. Air India Express Flight 812 was boarded with a total of 160 passengers and 6 crew, and once boarding was complete, the flight crew gained start clearance and started the engines. The captain, a 55-year-old British-Serbian national, had accrued over 10,000 hours of flying experience and over 7,000 hours in a command position. The first officer, a 40-year-old Indian national, had just under 4,000 hours of flying experience in total. Both pilots were based out of Mangalore and were familiar with the complicated landing procedure and the rules in place. The captain had made a total of 16 landings at Mangalore, with the first officer operating as a co-pilot for 66 landings to Mangalore. The flight crew taxied the aircraft to the taxi holding point before being cleared to take off 10 minutes ahead of their scheduled departure time of 02:45 India Standard Time. The flight crew lined the Boeing 737 up with the center line before advancing the thrust levers for takeoff thrust. At 02:36, Flight 812 took off and started its 4-hour flight to India. They were cleared to flight level 370, or 37,000 feet, with the climb and the initial cruise all occurring uneventfully. Once established in the cruise, the captain fell asleep in his chair, with the first officer flying the aircraft and carrying out all the radio communications. 3 hours after departure, and as the aircraft was approaching Mangalore, around 05:30 India Standard Time, Air India Express Flight 812 made contact with Mangalore Area Control. They had issued a NOTAM, which at the time stood for Notice to Airman, you may have heard it as Notice to Air Mission these days, stating that the radar was unserviceable, and owing to the radar outage, the controllers were working aircraft using the much slower time-based procedural service. When working procedurally, they cannot use the screen and have to rely on pilots' reports of level and position and use time and speed-based calculations to maintain separation between aircraft. When working procedurally, only one aircraft can be on approach at any one time, and the following aircraft will have to remain in the hold until the previous aircraft has landed. When the first officer asked what type of approach they could expect, the area controller advised them that they were to expect an ILS DME arc approach. On this type of approach, the aircraft is to fly an arc at a set distance from the co-located DME or distance measuring equipment, which forms part of the ILS, the instrument landing system, until it intercepts the ILS localizer and glide slope. The localizer gives the pilots left and right guidance to ensure that they are lined up with the runway centerline, and the glide slope gives vertical guidance, which if followed brings the aircraft onto a slope down to the touchdown point for the runway in use. When the aircraft intercepts the localizer and glide path, it is to turn onto runway heading and report localizer established to air traffic control in anticipation of a landing clearance. The first officer of Air India Express Flight 812 requested a descent to put them in a better position for making the start of the approach. However, this was denied by the area controller. This was because descending the aircraft at that time under a procedural service would mean the loss of separation between them and other aircraft. So based on the time and distance calculations by the controller, the aircraft had to delay the descent until this potential conflict was clear. This had a knock-on effect on the flight, as it meant that when they were cleared to descend, there were fewer track miles to run to the airfield than they would have normally expected had they been under a radar service. It was at this point, with under 25 minutes until landing, that the captain woke up. The first officer informed him of the current weather at the airfield and that the radar was unavailable. Only a few minutes later, with Flight 812 77 miles away from the airfield, they were now cleared to descend to 7,000 feet. As they started their descent, the crew failed to carry out a briefing for their approach and did not plan the descent profile properly. This is a critical phase of flight, and the crew would be well aware of how important this briefing was to carry out a safe approach, and this was a breach of their operating procedures. They turned left to establish on the 10-mile DME arc, and as they were passing through flight level 184, they were cleared to continue descent to 2,900 feet. The aircraft was much higher than expected to join the ILS glide slope. The captain had the speed brakes deployed in the flight's detent position, and realizing he was twice the height expected to join the ILS, he took the landing gear early and increased the rate of descent. As Flight 812 turned to intercept the localizer, they were cleared for the ILS DME arc approach for runway 24, and when air traffic control queried if the aircraft had established on the ILS, the first officer replied affirmative. However, the failure to plan for the correct descent profile meant that on completion of the arc to intercept the ILS, the aircraft was not on a stabilized approach, which meant that when the aircraft was on a final approach within 4 miles of landing, it was still almost twice the altitude it should have been. As pilots will know, the ILS should always be intercepted from below and not from above, as this can make it difficult for the aircraft to slow down sufficiently. It can also lead to the aircraft systems incorrectly capturing a false glide slope due to reflection, which could lead to a much steeper approach than the true glide slope. The captain selected flaps 40 and completed the landing checklist. At 0603, with the aircraft 2.5 nautical miles from the runway and still at 2,500 feet, the first officer said, "It is too high. The runway is straight down." The captain stated, "Oh my God," and disconnected the autopilot. He then pitched down to increase the rate of descent. The first officer called out to the captain to go around. Remember, the nature of this critical airfield meant that the first officer was not allowed to land, and the captain had to be the pilot in command to legally make the approach. The captain replied with, "Wrong localizer, glide path." The first officer gave a second call to go around, and then called unstabilized. The captain increased the rate of descent to 4,000 feet per minute. Due to this, there are numerous sink rate and pull-up warnings from the ground proximity warning system. Despite the call to go around and 2 further calls from the first officer, plus all the systems warnings around him, the captain persisted and almost seemed blinkered to all of the evidence confirming that they should break off the approach. Air India Express Flight 812 was now cleared to land. The captain continued the approach, passing over the runway threshold at 200 feet, which was 150 feet higher than expected. The first officer, for the 3rd time, stated, "Go around, Captain," followed by, "We don't have runway left." The aircraft landed on runway 24. It touched down almost 5,200 feet, or 1,600 meters, from the threshold, with roughly 2/3 of the runway behind it, leaving only 2,800 feet, or 850 meters, in which to stop. As soon as the aircraft touched down, the captain engaged the reverse thrust and attempted to stop, but then realized the gravity of the situation and put on full thrust in an attempt to initiate a very late go-around. This was a direct contravention of Boeing standard operating procedures. But all of this was in vain, as it was far too late to be able to do anything. The aircraft sped towards the end of the runway, its right wing hit the ILS monitoring antenna and through the perimeter fence as it went off the end of the runway. It went through the boundary fence and broke up as it went over the cliff edge. Due to the impact of hitting the antenna and the fence and the fire that broke out, all but 8 people on board perished. Of those 8 people, many were sat behind the wings, with the blue squares representing the survivors. The subsequent Board of Inquiry determined that 3 factors led to the fatal outcome of this crash. The first was that despite evidence that he had received adequate rest before the flight, the captain being asleep for at least 1 hour and 40 minutes. The cockpit voice recorder usually records 2 hours worth of audio before rewriting over the previous recording. For this flight, the last 2 hours and 5 minutes were recorded, and for 1 hour and 40 minutes of that final 2 hours, the captain was silent, with intermittent sounds of deep breathing and on occasion snoring from the recorder. On waking up, there was a distinct possibility of him feeling the conditions of sleep inertia. This is the groggy feeling you sometimes feel after waking up, and this is known to impair alertness and psychomotor ability. Now, pilot sleep-in or controlled rest is not an unusual thing, with many airlines allowing it. However, they follow procedure to minimize the negative effects and boost the positive. For example, the length of rest should not exceed 45 minutes to avoid sleep inertia, and should be completed at least 30 minutes prior to the planned top of descent. It was noted that the captain's sleep likely left him feeling sluggish, and this severely impacted his judgment. It was also noted that at 05:30 in the morning, the time in which the aircraft made its approach to Mangalore, is in what's known as the window of circadian low, when those used to a day-night sleep cycle are most tired. It was also stated in the report that owing to the unserviceability of the Mangalore area control radar and the procedural service being in place, the aircraft was given clearance to descend with fewer track miles to run than usual. It was added that this was made significantly worse by the crew's failure to brief for the descent, which meant they were much too high on the approach. The third and final factor was stated that there was ambiguity surrounding the first officer's ability to initiate a go-around rather than calling for the captain to initiate a go-around. It was strongly recommended that the instructions for first officers in such cases be updated so that it was clear that the first officer could take the controls should a go-around not be initiated by the pilot in command in a timely manner. The location of the crash site made recovery extremely difficult, and it took 15 fire trucks, 20 ambulances, and over 100 workers to tackle the wreckage immediately following the crash. Local people joined in the rescue effort to save as many people as possible. There were 12 unidentified and unclaimed victims of the crash whose bodies were laid to rest near the crash site. Following this, a memorial to the victims of Air India Express Flight 812 was created on the same site, as well as a park, and a memorial service is held there every year on the 22nd of May to remember those that were lost. This incident highlights the need for good or even basic crew resource management, as well as a flight deck where both pilots are empowered enough to act on safety issues. The captain sleeping until 25 minutes before landing on a critical airfield that required more concentration is madness. But the fact that the first officer didn't feel that he could have woken him up earlier shows a larger issue surrounding the cockpit gradient or the power dynamic between the captain and the first officer. The decision to continue, even with 3 calls from the first officer to go around, was clearly a bad call, with this tragic conclusion being avoided with a simple go around and reapproach. I'm interested to hear what you think about this incident. Please let me know down in the comments below. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next one.